Inclusion and Belonging, where we literally talk about everything diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging under the sun. I am Mo Berkner-Boyd. I am the founder of the Moxie Exchange and Everyday Inclusion. I am a white woman with red hair, rocking some red frames today, green puffy vest because it's fall and it's cold, black shirt. And behind me, I've got my bookshelf with some of my favorite books and tchotchkes, as I call them. I want to acknowledge that I am sitting on the ancestral lands of the Ute and Arapaho people. And I can't wait for this conversation, Julia. Julia is the Chief People Officer at Qualtrics. And before the cameras even rolled, Julia and I were having this conversation. I said, hold on, we need to be having this conversation live. So Julia, welcome. Introduce yourself, your phenomenal background, and how you came to be at Qualtrics.
Sure, I'd love to. First, I just want to say thanks for having me. Like, the opportunity to get to speak with you today is really the peak and the highlight of my day. So thank you so much. For those of you that I don't know or don't know me, my name's Julia Annis. As Mo shared, I lead the people team at Qualtrics. The pronouns I go by are she and her. I am a white female with long dark hair. Today, I'm sporting a gray sweater. Mo mentioned it's fall. It is. So I've got a gray sweater on with a gray chevron, dark gray chevron background with a little sprinkle of fall with some yellow behind me and some decoration. In terms of my journey, wow, if you would have asked my younger self, or maybe I should say my earlier in career self, if I would be, in this role, or if my aspiration was to lead the people team, I would have said no. I would have said no. I came into HR in a really awesome way. I joined a new college grad program right out of school and was immersed into a 6-month rotational HR program, really getting to know all different facets of HR and really getting to explore, really learn a lot more about just HR, the power it had. And then I intentionally took myself on a journey, which really had me at a lot of different companies. So everything from tech, for sure. There's a little tech in my background, even cosmetics. So I worked at Invisalign or Align Technology, to internet at Yahoo, solar company that didn't make it and went through a bankruptcy we had government loans and all of that, a company called Solyndra, and then moved into tech and into kind of finance with, Intuit, Symantec into security, then into more recently Adobe. And from Adobe was the longest tenure of a company I'd been at. And so every time I looked at pivoting to a different point in my career, I would take a look at 3 pie charts. 1, type of HR experience I would obtain and I would get to learn from the experience. 2, the life cycle of the business. And 3rd, the industry. And each time something different would be shaded, and sometimes some similar pies of those charts would be shaded. But net of it was the diversity of the combination was a different experience. Each time I was able to lead change in HR, able to work in HR, that combination unlocked something very different for me. So when the opportunity came to work at Qualtrics, I had probably only decided about, I would say, 4 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago. I had the fortune of working really closely with a CHRO at Adobe and really getting full inside scoop to what that was like. And it was at that moment that I became really interested in what is the art of the possible? Is that something, that I could even do? And it was just the perfect opportunity that I received a call from Qualtrics. And look, it ended up meeting a move for my family, which has been a really exciting personal journey too, in terms of just leading through change with my kids and my family and all of that. So how I got here was, a lot of different roles in HR and a lot of different industries, but I'll say the opportunity to work at a company where experiences matter, I truly believe employee experience differentiates good from great companies, period. Full stop. And so the opportunity to lead a people organization at an experience management company like Qualtrics, it was one of those just once in a lifetime opportunities, and one that I just couldn't say no to. I couldn't pass up after meeting the team, the leadership team, hearing about what they were looking to do. And here I am 22 months later, in the role, still with a big smile, even though we've gone through a lot of things if we think about the external environment and what we've led through. But just love being here. And again, thanks for the invite to talk to you.
Oh my gosh. So y'all, if you watch that couple minutes, you just got a case study in a well-managed career, right? You were really intentional about things, and I love that. And I absolutely love that. So rewind the tape, y'all, and watch that. Now we're going to talk about how that relates to inclusion. But before, it was really interesting, Julia, before we went live, you were a couple minutes late, and you came on and said, oh my gosh, my kid's school just called. I'm trying to figure out, we have to go pick them up. And it was this whole thing. And you and I started talking about what it's like being a working mom. And then we started talking about transparency around that and what that means for organizations, because we know maternal bias is real. And so for a long time, people would not even talk about having kids, right? Or would say, like, I have an appointment, or I have right? Even just what you and I were having this, like, oh my gosh, I had this time when my babysitter didn't show up. And when we're talking about inclusion, and when we're talking about cultures of inclusion, how important it is as leaders to model that, right? That vulnerability and sometimes it hits the fan, right? At the worst possible moments. And what do you do and how do you manage that, right? And talking about that with your teams.
Yeah, it's so important. And it's kind of like when I joined, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. 4 minutes late, not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. But I also have learned, maybe a little bit through the hard way through my own experiences, but I have just found, like, I'm human. Okay. And admitting that and just owning that. And I do have some little people who still rely on me. And if I could program when his tummy hurt or when his head hurt and when he went to the nurse's office, like, amazing. But unfortunately, he can't be programmed. And I did get that call, and I was like, okay, well, we're going to see how we're going to figure this out. And anyone that's wondering about his well-being, he's well taken care of with the school nurse, and my husband's on the way. This is what's called where you tag team in and you figure out, how's this going to work? And so, thankfully, I've got
even the privilege in being able to do that.
That's
right. Like
exactly
such a privilege of being able to pivot and tag team. And a lot of people don't even have that. So even thinking about it as an organization, what are you doing? What do you have around policies when particularly we know 80% of caregivers are, whether that's of kids or aging or sick relatives, are women? How are you supporting them through this? We've seen, and we're seeing now, right? The great resignation of women is continuing, and women are choosing to walk because they're done. They're done with companies that aren't willing to lean into that with them, and the messy and the hard, because boy, this is such a case study, and this is the reality of it.
That's it. That's exactly it. And the piece for me, and something that I choose to model, is around this idea of we're human, and our primary purpose is our personal journey. And the professional journey that we're on needs to support the personal journey and that end destination. And as those things work together, right? And that means owning. And earlier in my career, I didn't used to own that I would have a complication at home. I would, a personal commitment. And finally, it was like, I'm just going to own this. I'm actually, as a woman, it's important to me that from an inclusivity perspective, I bring Julia. So when you engage with Julia, you're going to get the good, the bads, and even some of the ugliness. I've got ugly sides too. I try to manage those, but there's a sense of like, I am who I am, and I've got the things I'm driving, professionally, but there's also the personal pieces that need to continue on the rails successfully moving forward also. And really understanding what that is. Like, I'm very intentional with my team. I want to understand, what is that for them? And although our paths in some cases might be different, I've got some team members, that maybe haven't chosen parenthood, or, it just hasn't been there for them just yet, or maybe some that have. Regardless, parenthood is a piece of me. And so I'll share, hey, I got to take this call on the road. I've got to pick up a kid. Like, that's just, it is what it is. Or I've got a sick kid, or whatever it might be. And creating that space for people, I have found to be just very opening, and people, it just creates a space. And I think there's a safety that comes with that, of like, oh, wow, I can maybe relate to her because she's also human. And it's like, yeah, I've got my stuff too. We all do. But as a leader, really understanding people and, being inclusive of how that personal journey intersects with the professional journey is so important.
So important. And again, the modeling of it too, because there's also positional privilege, right? So if we're not sharing the good, the bad, the ugly, like all of that, I think that's key. So I appreciate the conversation you and I had, just even the sharing and sharing the journey that we both had to get to the point of, here it is. And reality happens. And I'm sure that some of my team members were laughing, because we were talking this morning in our team meeting about, this is all about our personal journey. And then hearing you say that, they're probably like, wait a minute, we just had this conversation. So let's talk about how y'all think about diversity, equity, and inclusion at Qualtrics, because I think what's really interesting always for me is, what lens is an organization coming at this, right? How are they looking at this work? So how do you all think about it?
Yeah. And I'll say this, like, first stop, if I pull all the way back, right? We think about diversity as, we strive to have representation that matches the world around us, with inclusion that exceeds it. So indexing.
Stop, say that again.
Yeah. So we talk about, diversity, meaning we aspire to have representation that matches the world around us, right? That's very diverse in its nature, and inclusion that exceeds it. And that is really important, because you can have differences of experiences. Both, when we think about diversity and we define diversity, it's the full spectrum of human differences. Okay. That spans, there's definitely things that are seen around, like race, gender, age, maybe ability, maybe. And then there's the things that are unseen as we think about diversity of thoughts or sexual orientation, whether there's a military component, neurodiversity, parental status, all the things. There's so much more that isn't seen. And so diversity in its full spectrum is all of that together. And inclusion is not only saying that's important, but here's how we create an environment to foster that sense of community and belonging where it can exist. It's important for us at Qualtrics that we have that, because not only does it represent, what our customers might need from us, but it really harnesses that diversity of thought, which extends much beyond that. And that's true core to our business as we're thinking about experience gaps, around the globe.
Yeah. And I love that, because I think, there tends to be like, here's how we, we're going to sort of not check these boxes, but we've got like the usual suspects, right? In terms of diversity. And then the things that truly, that full, beautiful mosaic and spectrum of it, that most that you can't see, that I think is fascinating. So I love that approach. And then, that inclusion that is better than represented in the world, and the focus on that instead of one, right? So you're approaching it from both lenses. What, particularly in the last couple of years, what have y'all learned? Because, this has been, it's been a wild ride. So let's talk about the 22 months that you've been there. What has Qualtrics done on this journey?
Yeah. And I would say it's a journey that we're continuing to learn, right? And I don't know, one of the things I do often just sit back and just inside of Julia's head thought is, when will we ever get there? Or is this a continual evolution, right? Just in terms of as the world continues to change, right? Is there, sure, we aspire and we have, goals in terms of it helps us hold accountability. It helps us measure progress, and to show that we're moving in the right direction, to show, but for ourselves, not for anybody other than, there's no one more important than ourselves, because we deem this as being important to who we are as a company. And if I think about the past 22 months and even backing up, just prior to me joining, right? Prior to, 2020, we didn't even have a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so that was established before I got there. I can't take any credit for that. We have a fantastic leader who leads diversity, equity, inclusion on the team, named Farron Roper. And I'm so fortunate that he's on the team. I love a little Farron love. And just so fortunate to have him as a thought partner, and as a leader in the organization, both, internally as we continue to evolve and make progress on our journey, but also in terms of how we continue to think about the impact that we can even make externally, and have that ripple effect that goes beyond, ourselves. That being said, though, we started measuring our representation. I think most companies, right, have taken more of an inside look of, what is our diverse representation? And, beginning this year, we focused on establishing a 5-year strategy, not just about now and in the present. Because again, if we think about a journey isn't just a destination that you get to in a year. It's a building block with a series of moments, a series of destinations that take you upon, ultimately, that journey and where you end up. And so we measure it through diversity of our workforce globally, looking at gender, and that's something that we take a look at, globally. We also look at our underrepresented minorities here in the US and what that looks like. And, I'll just share, in 2027, we aspire to have 50% of our workforce across the globe be women. And in 2027, we aspire for that, our underrepresented minorities here in the US to be 27%. And those are very lofty, aspirational moments for us as a company. Why? Today, I'll just share, as of, Q3, we're at 36%, women, but we've made quite a bit of progress. So if I'm fair to the team, right, it's been such a focus area as we've thought about hiring, et cetera. We're, our diverse representation of gender is up 6%, just in the last year, but 13% in the last 2.
Yeah, see, and that's you measure what matters, right? And so you're measuring it and you're watching it, you're paying attention to it. It's a business driver. Love it. Yep. Those are great numbers over the last 2 years.
Yeah. And similarly, I'll just share quickly on the, underrepresented minorities. Like today, we're at 12.5%, which that sounds like, okay, what does that mean? Well, I can tell you this much. We've increased significantly over the last 2 years in there in terms of we're up 19%, right, year over year. And then as we think about what's our, to get to 27%, we're not even halfway there. But we've made substantial improvement. And that's really, again, driving awareness at the company level, talking about, to your great point, what's important and why, like why it matters, not for a number's sake. Why it matters to drive the right business outcomes for our customers, and really talking about it in that spirit. And then also being able to have the right strategy. here's working at home.
Right,
Those
exactly.
would be my 2 mini golden doodles who are very interested and who might have just rung the doorbell. I'm sure the UPS man's out to get me.
Right. I love it. Hopefully hopefully they'll come make a cameo too.
Maybe. But we talk about that because it matters. And so as we continue on our journey, we also talk a lot. So that's the diversity component. We talk about equity in terms of why that's important and measure it, based on like pay equity. We talk about our promotions and the percent promotions based on gender, underrepresented, minorities, again, really shining a light to the organization, and just to own it transparently. Yep. As a leadership team and as a company. And then lastly, we talk quite a bit about inclusion, and inclusion from a sense of it's something that we measure on a quarterly basis. And we're looking to drive inclusion of 85%, but with zero inclusion gap. And what that means really is around having a zero gap between our majority group and our underrepresented group. And it's not about bringing the majority down. Okay. I'm not looking to bring down the inclusion experience of anyone. However, I'm looking to make them, equal. And we as a company are focused on that.
I think that's such a great point, because we know it's a huge miss if you're measuring that and you aren't looking at the experience of underrepresented, marginalized folks. Right? Because you might have a phenomenal experience for dominant group. And because your underrepresented folks make up a smaller portion, they get be having a terrible experience. And I know a company that this was absolutely the case, and talking to the CEO, he's like, our scores are great. I'm like, let's dig into your data a little bit harder. So I love that is a focus as well, right? That will drive the right outcomes. Love. What are some things that I think it's always interesting if you say, gosh, this was a miss, or I wish we would have done this differently. I think there's good, and maybe you don't have something specific that comes to mind, or maybe you're like, oh, Mo, I got a good one. I think one of the things that I read that you wrote that I loved was, we're not trying to be right, we're trying to get it right. And maybe it's even just how you apply that attitude across, because we're never going to get it right all the time, whether that's a program, whether that's an approach, whether that is communication, whether that's a process. And, how do you apply that? We're not trying to be right, we're trying to get it right.
Yeah, it really came to be something last year. And it was derived and it came up through a lot of the conversations, frankly, that we had around our future work experience. And it really became this notion around, because what we originally announced and where we are today are very different. Yeah. Let's just say what we originally announced didn't go over well. Okay. Really not well. And that's okay. Right. Sometimes you just have to, you experiment, you try, and it's like, wow, okay, well, we learned a lot. And guess what? As leaders too, we can stumble. And what it created was this, okay, there's an opportunity for us to listen even harder and more intentionally. One of the mistakes I've made, and I'll just own it, and it's been since being at Qualtrics, and it was this notion around, hey, employees, we're going to ask for your feedback. And your feedback's it's going to be data that's going to help us drive to decisions. It actually, right? And so then when we announced it, it was like, you're not listening. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Did I actually really mean the word drive? And so I went back on an all company meeting and I just owned it. Said, hey, look, here's what I said. Here's what I actually meant. It's going to help inform. We as leaders as a company are going to be looking to make, directional decisions. However, it's important that we hear what's important to you. And we heard, like, for this case, and we looked across personas included in our underrepresented groups, what mattered. And we saw what mattered for women. We saw what mattered for underrepresented minorities, and where there were similarities and where there were differences. And the similarities across all groups, high performers, women, underrepresented groups, et cetera, said flexibility, connection, and community.
Yep.
So it really kind of created this idea around, look, we're going to be vulnerable. We're going to learn too. We haven't yet done this hybrid work environment, for example, but we're going to continually listen. And there are going to be things that we try that we don't get right. Cool, peace. Like, learn with us. Like, help us learn, right? Help us help you kind of mentality. A little bit of that Jerry Maguire, right? How do we work together and not this us, them, but it's like us. Again, in the spirit of inclusion, we're together on this journey and we can learn best from one another what works, what doesn't work. But at some point, you know, as leaders, there's a decision point or something you have to make a call on. And it's like, hey, here's what we heard. And we heard this. It might be slightly different, but here's how we want to bring it together and at least experiment and try and lean in.
You know what I'm hearing just across everything that we've talked about is transparency, like how much transparency and right, how you're sharing and I think when we approach things too, so there's this transparency and there's also this growth mindset of we're just going to keep learning, right? And we may mess it up and we're not so concerned because so many times what you'll see is an organization makes a decision. They might have spent a lot of time, money, they put it out there and it's not working and they double down, right? Like, double down and this is why, and, you know, bring out the PowerPoints and do the whole thing, you know, whatever it might be. Let's get the marketing team involved. Let's get the change management people involved. Let's try and get versus this isn't doing what we, right? Like we want to get it right. And this constant evolution, which I think is great. I think particularly when we're where we have never been before.
Exactly.
I know that.
And I think the other piece, sorry, one other thing, if I can just add, like the insight that you gain in that moment, right? Like just being real. We are all diverse and we all have different needs and different moments. And so understanding that employees have different needs is really important just as a leader, right? And having that leadership moment of how am I going to lead with empathy? Well, it starts by really understanding your people and recognizing that their needs are not all the same. And even how they like to engage is not all the same. And so really being intentional about getting to know what's important to them, what makes them tick, where are the things that they need your help or not, is really important to being inclusive to just your overall dynamic of your team as a leader.
You know, that brings up a couple of things. We always talk about this as it's like fingerprints. Like you might have, right? Like we have the fingerprints, but our fingerprints are different. And so how you can create that experience. And we also talk about microcultures, right? That how you are and how leaders and particularly new leaders understand that the environment and the culture on their team is really crucial, right? So understanding that deep listening, that the ability to be flexible within a framework, and how key that is. And, you know, that's really what's been missing in the approach to inclusion in so many organizations. They're missing that piece, right? So they might have a policy and they might have, but they're not giving those people leaders the tools. So I love this, like, listen deeply. I know that y'all have really leaned into your employee resource groups and have been doing some great things. I would love to hear your approach and just overall philosophy to the role that those employee resource groups fill in the organization.
Yes. And I'll say this, right? Community matters. And having connection with communities, whether it's a community you identify with, or it's a community just to be an ally with, right? And I shouldn't say just to be, like, to be an ally with is huge. And you know what? Each of us that has the fortune, like, fortunate ability to do that is huge, because that's the power of voice and the way to amplify others in just such a meaningful way. And Qualtrics does have, 6 community, groups. We call them Q groups. And it's really around building our focus around inclusion programs. And so we do that to form a sense of community, but also be very intentional about incorporating learning opportunities that widen the focus, whether it be on unconscious bias, and even anti-racism, even to how we've thought about creating an inclusive leadership curriculum, which is just launching to our leaders this year. And that's been something that we've built via homegrown around what's important in our own definition around inclusive leadership and why is it important to us. And the communities help in such a meaningful way in a lot of the great work that we do. One, at least, and I'll just use myself as an example, being a white woman, okay, I don't know the experience, although I listen and I'm an ally to all of our Q groups, right? We give them budgets and to help champion that community and that the community element, but then also the learning opportunities. And then we give them opportunity to communicate those to the whole company, right, globally. And why is it important? So whether that's, our Q Pride group hosting Pride Month, or whether that be our Women Leadership and Development, group, or what we call WLD hosting, International Women's Month. Like, each community is very connected to how they can help us drive awareness, but how they can also drive the community to action, and to help, because that in and of itself improves the environment and the culture that we have as a company as we continue to evolve and grow. So they play a very integral part. Oftentimes, for some of the moments that we have throughout the year, I even take a minute to redirect, like even on LinkedIn, like I'll redirect to something one of our community group members has written that can really tell the story in a much more impactful, real way than what I'm able to do. And recognizing that is important and it's meaningful. I love our Q groups, and they're not 100% dedicated roles. So the folks that are leaders in these communities do it because they're passionate about making a difference, about making an impact, and they want to affect great change. And with that, we create the space for them, a little bit of budget for them to help them in that journey as they partner closely, with our people team and with Farron and the DE&I team around what are those moments that we can create and do it together. Again, in that spirit of inclusion, like how do we do it together?
I knew that this was going to be a great conversation. I appreciate you sharing just so many, the threads along the way of transparency and deep listening and measurement, and like I'm thinking about all of the themes that I was picking up, Julia. Leave me with one last truth bomb about DEI and leadership.
Yeah, look, I think the one last thing I would leave with, Mo, is evolving an employee experience. It is an inclusive and employee experience. It differentiates good from great companies. And look, you can't play a guessing game about what your employees care about. You will consistently guess wrong. I'm here to tell you, you will guess wrong. So really listening and understanding what matters is so important, and leading and finding a way to be authentic about your inclusion leadership journey that you're on. You got to be real. Awesome, Julia.
Thank you. I'm going to be re-listening to this one to gather some nuggets of what you're up to. I love your aspirational goals, your really 360 approach, right? Thinking about both the diversity all the way through to inclusion and belonging. Keep doing great work. And to the rest of you who are a part of the Everyday Inclusion and Belonging community, We always say it's the getting out there and doing the next right thing. So think about one of the things that Julia said, pick it up and run with it. So appreciate you all. Everybody keep doing the good work, get out there and do the next right thing. And we will see you next time on Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Cheers, y'all.